This is the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast with your host, Chris Spear. Each week, I'll be speaking with food entrepreneurs and people in the culinary industry. If you're interested in learning more about our organization dedicated to helping people build and grow their food businesses, look us up on the web at chefswithoutrestaurants.com and .org, and on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Chefs Without Restaurants. Now, enjoy the show. This is episode 18 of the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. So I headed to Washington, D.C. to speak with Mexican chef Christian Irabién about the process of opening up his brick-and-mortar restaurant Ampar Fondita. He's currently going through the process of building it and trying to find funding for the restaurant. So there's a lot of talk about what it takes and some of the challenges to get a restaurant backed by investors. We also talk a lot about Mexican cooking, something I personally love. I was really happy to get Christian on the show, and I hope you enjoy it. Have a great week. All right, welcome to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. This is Chris. I've come down to Washington, D.C. to speak with a special guest I'm excited to talk to today. So why don't you go ahead and give yourself a little intro. Who are you and what do you do?
My name is Christian Irabién. I am a Mexican chef, 20-year D.C. resident, and in the process of trying to open a restaurant. Emphasis on the trying.
Yeah. So how long has that process been going?
We're about 16 months in.
Wow, 16 months. When did the vision first start for the restaurant? Because I know a little bit about it. It seems like it's been a little while that you've wanted to be doing this.
Yeah, I think the vision started long time ago. Well over 8-9 years. It's taken many different forms to what it is now. But yeah, it's a process of visualizing and putting pen to paper and then actually taking actionable steps to get going.
So what's the name of the restaurant?
The name of the restaurant is Ampar Fondita. Amparo is Spanish for shelter, and it's also my mother's name and my grandmother's name. And Fondita is just a name that in Mexico we give to small neighborhood eateries.
I had the opportunity to check out your pop-up that you did over at District Space. How long ago was that? Was that a year ago? A little over a year ago, I think you did?
That was a little bit over a year ago. It was summer of 2018. Summer of 2018, yeah.
Yeah. How did that go for you over there?
Really well. Surprisingly well. I think unexpectedly well. We had a space to work in. It was the first time where we had a kitchen that was stable enough to be open for longer than a few hours, and tables and chairs and a bar. And we were able to take the concept and the vision and put it out for people, and it had an amazing reception. Is there
a world where if it didn't go well, you would have maybe not thought about continuing the process of opening a restaurant? Or would you have just kind of stuck to your guns and pushed ahead making changes?
Well, I think by virtue of existing in the restaurant world, when things go wrong, I think it only makes me want to do it more. I think one thing that I was taught and learned in kitchens growing up is that if it doesn't hurt, it's probably not working. So
it's good advice.
So yeah, I don't know if we would have had a full-on failure. I think it would have been a moment of reflection, stepping back, figuring out what went wrong, and getting back to it.
So it makes you want to open a restaurant. I mean, it's not easy. I see you kind of like looking around right now, thinking about that. I mean, in DC, when there's so many opportunities to be a chef somewhere else, why do your own thing and why
now? Why now? Because I think, much like everything in life, I think you start doing things when you start feeling like you're ready to do them. It's taken me quite a while to get to where I am right now through a long process of learning opportunities and failures and accidents and just life in general. But I think getting to where I am right now I needed to feel like I was ready to do it, and I hadn't felt that until we started doing this. And secondly, why this? It's because very much out of a selfish point of view is when I go out to eat and I want Mexican food, there's not really anywhere that I feel like I could go get the things that I want to eat, at least on a regular basis, that's approachable and that has the items on the menu that I would like to eat that aren't necessarily just the template menu items that you see in every Mexican restaurant across the country.
Is there a reason why it seems to be so homogenous? I mean, I find that you go out and everyone's got the same menu items, and I'm not really excited about a lot of the Mexican food I'm seeing out there. I mean, you obviously have a couple cool places in DC, but for the most part, it seems like they're almost interchangeable.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it's a human condition or an American condition, but people like to pigeonhole things. It's a lot easier to digest when you know that when you go into a place, you're going to be able to get the rigatoni in red sauce and meat, or if you're going to go into a Greek place, that you are going to be able to get the tzatziki and the lamb, or if you're going to go into a Mexican restaurant, that you're going to be able to get the carnitas taco. I think it's the innate necessity for people to identify and feel familiar with what they're getting. But to a certain extent, we feel that it stunts the ability of cuisines and cultures to be able to extend further, because there's no room for growth, right? If you're just making the same 5 things everywhere.
Yeah.
Which also faces an interesting challenge of, if we do this, is anybody going to come, right? So.
Well, and not everyone's a chef. I mean, you're definitely a chef and coming from a chef background. How many people are coming here from, say, Mexico, and it's just kind of family cooking, but they're not coming at it from that chef angle. I mean, just because you come from a place doesn't mean you're necessarily best suited to be cooking the food and selling it in a professional setting. But, to me, it feels that way a lot of times. I go in places and it just feels like it's basic, maybe isn't the word for it, but, it's like, wow, I feel like you just opened a can of pre-made refried beans and are just kind of phoning it in here.
Yeah, I think people like to play it safe. I think it's easy to try to play it safe and try to exist in your comfort zone. And again, the fears of experimentation and what effects it'll have on the business and how many people are actually going to come and do it is, I think, a very real one, when it's your money on the line, it's your name on the line, it's all your the livelihood of your entire team on the line, and how to make sure that people are coming in the door. So I think a lot of people definitely play it safe because of that, and I'm sure like a million other reasons. But for us, it's sort of trying to figure out how do we bring the familiar things while also making room for things that are maybe not as commonly known.
Yeah, I mean,
and how do we present those familiar things in a different way?
I think I had something like, were you doing nixtamalized mango or something like that at your pop-up, or on a dessert or something? There was just some like really interesting thing where you're like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, we were nixtamalizing papaya.
Papaya.
So yeah, and I think we nixtamalized a bunch of fruit. So we nixtamalized the corn to cook and then grind to make the masa for the tortillas. And I think through a series of just like boredom and knowledge of other chefs in Mexico doing certain things, we just started throwing different things into a pot that had the slack lime in the water and just trying to see what happened. And the papaya just ended up having like an incredible texture.
Yeah, like I find that's not something you're going to find in any other Mexican restaurant around here.
Yeah, I think, and again, that kind of just goes back to our point of most of the menus that we find in the city and sometimes even beyond the city, unless you're going somewhere like New York or San Francisco, LA or Chicago, where the food scene tends to be a little bit more, I don't know if avant-garde is the word, but definitely a little more adventurous.
Yeah, I mean, I was up at Cosme in October, and that's not the kind of Mexican food you're seeing in most places in the US.
Like, I mean, I think if you don't know who the chef at Cosme is and you don't necessarily know what to expect, when you walk in, the last thing you expect is for that place to be a Mexican restaurant.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think to have that freedom and the platform to be able to execute something like that, I don't know. I mean, we hope and want DC to be there. Our hope is that we are able to get to a point where when we open the doors, people aren't expecting skulls, pink walls, sombreros, and, endless chips and salsa, but rather coming in for a cultural experience of not just flavors, but also cooking techniques, ambiance, music, cocktails, service that are maybe not necessarily as portrayed or as expected from the places that are in the city currently executing Mexican food.
So how did you first get involved in professional cooking? Did you always love cooking? Did you have that story of growing up cooking with family and then working at little places, or how did you end up where you are now?
Well, I grew up eating for sure. I grew up in Mexico where the family unit is very much still a thing. Eating out is a thing you do for a special occasion, but on the day-to-day breakfast, everybody gets together at the breakfast table. Everybody goes to work, goes to school. If you work close enough to the house, which a lot of times you do, you come home for lunch, you see the family, leave again, come back after work, dinner. Everybody comes to dinner, and it's just a giant bounty of food. The entire family is there. It's very communal and very familial. When we moved to the States, all of that spread out and it disappeared. When we get to the States, 1992, my grandparents opened a small Mexican restaurant in El Paso, Texas. So throughout the end of my middle school and my high school years, I spent time at that restaurant, which is not a restaurant like we know them to be now. It was definitely a small family spot in a strip mall in the middle of a really small town in Texas, where I did everything from sweeping floors, bussing tables, peeling shrimp, washing dishes. But I don't necessarily know that at those points I had any kind of correlation to what I was doing. I think it was just sort of this is what the family's doing, so these things need to get done, so go do them. Then after I left Texas, come up here, I was pursuing business administration, mostly because that's my family wanted me to do that. My family, besides the restaurant in El Paso, had food establishments in Mexico, through the entirety of their lives. My grandfather grew up in Mérida, Yucatan, and from everywhere from helping out fishermen bring fish from the coast into restaurants, to being maitre d', to being a sales rep for Bacardi, to eventually owning and operating his own distribution of sugar in Mexico that dealt to liquor companies, Coca-Cola, Bimbo, all of the different places that need sugar in the region before the government took the sugar industry over. So it was definitely always a very food-centric house. And growing up, a lot of the business ventures my grandfather and my family took were often food-related. I think when I got up here and I started working at the fund and the World Bank and these, international organizations, where my family was pushing me to go was always born out of this, never work in a restaurant.
Having a better life.
Yeah, it's really hard work. Don't do what we did. Do something better. But after a certain amount of time being in a cubicle for 5 hours a day, it was just not my bag. And then I started trying to explore what route I want to take, and food sort of just started coming back into existence. Again, having no idea what working in a restaurant was, other than that restaurant that we had, where, I don't know, if if some of the chefs that I had worked with early on had come into that kitchen, it would have been probably one of those like Ramsay's kitchen nightmare situations. So once I started experimenting and started staging and taking culinary classes, the challenge that it started providing and the crazy intense structure that kitchens had, that it was something I'd never seen before, was what started drawing me in. And eventually I just sort of had to make had to come to Jesus moment, had to make a decision. Do I leave a very well-paying job with benefits, controlled hours, 9 to 5 and Monday through Friday, to go make minimum wage for, 13 hours a day in like a basement kitchen? So like we were saying earlier, it sounded terrible. So obviously that's the route I took. And then, I don't know that I necessarily found cooking. I think it sort of found me. And I think I tried through my growing up, I tried so many different things trying to figure out what I wanted to do. And this one was the one that sort of stuck. And
what kind of kitchens were you working in? Were they kind of Eurocentric, French technique kind of fancy places? When did you know you wanted to stick with Mexican? Because you could have easily just started working at a place like the French Laundry and stay with that kind of cuisine forever. I could see the draw in that. So what kind of places were you staging and working at?
Yeah. So the very very first restaurant that I staged in here in DC was a place that is no longer, called Hook out in Georgetown, where I've made some of my current and best friends. Shout out to Tom at Saint and Andrew at Buford Saloon, where that's sort of where I met them, and sort of like that was the very first kitchen that I'd ever walked into, where I saw vegetables I'd never seen before. I saw fish that I'd never seen before. I saw people doing things with food that I'd never seen before, and it was just sort of like eye-opening. One of the conversations I had with someone early on, which I think was very, very helpful for me, was when trying to decide what kind of restaurant what restaurant I needed to be in, the chef said to me, figure out what the best restaurant in the city is and try to go work there, because you can always work your way down, but it's much harder to work your way back up. So I figured that out. And shortly thereafter, I found myself working at Restaurant Eve in Alexandria, which was intense. It was a very, very intense environment. A lot of people coming from French Laundry and per se, and very paramilitaristic. But at that point, I was a lot younger, and I really wanted it, and it hurt real bad, but I kept showing up. But that place, if nothing else, it showed me a lot of work ethic. It showed me a lot of technique and a lot of what I've grown up to have of like how to move and exist inside of a kitchen environment. Shortly thereafter, I moved from there. I was trying to, kind of connect with my food. Restaurant Eve was very American French, very French influence. From the structure to the cooking, and working with that group, as I stayed with them, they started giving me more liberty to work on specials and work with different ingredients and have a little bit more freedom as to what we were cooking. And as those doors started opening, my brain started going back to the food I grew up with. And I guess my question was always, or started becoming, I'm cooking all this food in a really intense way, but I'd never seen Mexican food cooked or presented that way, like anywhere. Like I grew up in places where the Mexican food was on a brown plastic plate with a schlop of like red rice, a schlop of beans, and whatever your protein was. And it was delicious, but that was just sort of like across the board what the food was. So going from that perception of what food was to walking into a place where you're doing, 9 to 12 courses of like perfectly cooked quails and perfectly cooked squabs to, with like a jus and a sauce and a vegetable chip and a powder and a flour and very composed dishes, which I think even in my wildest dreams before I got to work with that team, I had never imagined food was like that, So that opened up a lot of vision for me, but that also opened up the need to start looking at Mexican food. So at that point, that's when I started kind of looking back at Mexico and trying to see what the food scene was down there, who the chefs were, who was doing things, and what they were doing. Eventually, that led me to start exploring more restaurants in the city, and that's when I found Oyamel. I went to go eat there, and it blew my mind. It was.
And how big were they at that time? I'm sure they had some notoriety, but were they as big as they are today?
No, absolutely not. I think probably TFG at that point was at the pinnacle of making this massive shift of going. I mean, Jose was already at least a DC household name, if not, international. It was, the restaurants were still very, very locally run. So the chefs, everybody had, like pretty much oversight and responsibility for their own restaurants. But as time has progressed and now they've become bigger, then it's become more of a larger
corporate restaurant group, kind of. Yeah.
So they have more players into what goes in each restaurant. But when I got there, it was not only were they working with incredible technique and with a super talented team. Again, a lot, if not the majority, of my kitchen friends I've met and still hold really close and good relationships with, either worked with me at TFG during my time, or worked there before, or worked there after, or we have some sort of like connection to working with Jose. And it sort of just started. I mean, to me, it's an incredible, to me, it's always an incredible feeling walking into a French kitchen and smelling chicken stock and courgouillon cooking in the morning. Like that smell of just like vegetable steaming, for some reason, just like makes me lose my mind. It's amazing. But walking into a kitchen and smelling burning corn and chilies is life-changing. So for me to go from something where I was learning to, I mean, definitely Oyamel still learning, but working with products and flavors and just ingredients across the board that I was familiar with was, it was just exciting. I had no idea about a lot of things, and I mean, even conversations with my family currently, when we talk about the stuff that we cook and we say stuff like, oh, we're making mole. And then my grandmother or my mother will ask me what we're doing. And I'll say, it's like a 3-day process and it's all these ingredients and this and that. And they both look at me like dumbfounded going like, you can just buy this. Why are you doing this? So I think it's a little bit difficult for them to correlate, like the need to like really roll up your sleeves and get into the food. But when they eat it and they sit down with me and we talk about it, well, it goes one of two ways. It goes to, wow, this is really good, or like, this is not Mexican food at all.
Right.
This isn't how we used to make it. But yeah, so then that's when I got to Oyamel, that's when I started really exploring and lucky enough to be within a restaurant group that not only worked with a lot of really, really good talent, but also gave us the ability and the freedom to experiment and the resources to play around with food, cooking equipment, ingredients, whatever it was. Every time we were doing menu changes or seasonal changes was like, here's what we're doing. What do you want to do with it? Which way do you want to take it? You need something, we'll get it for you. So,
I think the first time I ever had insects were the grasshopper tacos there. I think that's one of those things, if you're down, you have to try when you go there. And Oyamel was literally the first restaurant I ever ate at when we moved here. We got here in 2007, and I knew Jose from Spain and El Bulli and all that, and I was super excited to eat in one of his restaurants. And I went there and had a great meal, and I've been there a number of times.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of magical what they were able to do with the restaurants. I mean, Oyamel to me holds a big place, not only because I cried and bled there for a while, but also because it's I mean, to me, in Washington, D.C., it's like if I think of somewhere to go taste authentic Mexican flavors, that's where I think about going. If I really want to go eat some and regardless of how far and wide my cooking abilities are, my eating habits are super simple. And when I think of what I want to eat, what makes me really feel like I'm being hugged from the inside is really good beans, really good rice, nice warm tortillas, and some salsa. So I mean, I could completely subsist for the rest of my life eating rice, beans, salsa, and tortillas. That's it.
And where do you stand on tortillas? Do you feel you have to make your own tortillas? And not necessarily, can you start with really good masa and make them? And should you be? I know it's not necessarily realistic in a small mom and pop, but, I kind of feel like a great tortilla really makes a taco or your Mexican food in a lot of places. I just don't think are using really good tortillas.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the conversations we have continuously is, when you go to an Italian restaurant and they're making their pasta, it's a completely different experience, right? Or if you're having a sandwich and the bread is either baked in house or they're getting really good bread, it changes completely your experience of the sandwich. And we see the same with masa. Do you have to? I don't think you have to. I think you create the experience that you're trying to create, and everybody's artistic vision or chef vision is different, and everybody puts up the best product that they know with the tools that they have, right?
And even flour tortillas, I think flour tortillas have a reputation or whatever, but the first time I made flour tortillas, I used Enrique Olvera's recipe. I was like, wow, this is what a flour tortilla could be. I was just dumbfounded because I don't think I'd ever had one. I don't know any place. You see corn tortillas being made at some places, but I can't remember ever having had a flour tortilla that was homemade, and I made them. And I thought, this is just the greatest tortilla I had ever had. It was amazing.
Yeah. And I think it's a sad reality too. I mean, if you go even in Mexico, because of, I guess, our current state, and if you wanted to start getting which we won't, but if you wanted to start getting political about it, everything, drawn up from NAFTA and the way that, big agro crops have, grown in Mexico, and imports and exports of all of these things, and how that's shaped the Mexican diet. Mm-hmm. There's people living in Mexico, the birthplace of corn and the tortilla, who have never had a tortilla made from fresh masa. They've grown up eating maseca, just the dry flour, add water, make a tortilla, or they're buying them at the shop because it's cheaper that way, or it's more accessible, or a million other reasons. So it's a little sad that you exist in that place and you've never had one. Let alone coming to the States where we live in a society of convenience.
Yeah, we're doing the same here. I grew up in New England, and I think of baked beans, and my mom made a great one. But most people didn't make baked beans. They just open a can of Bush's baked beans and have them on Saturday night with hot dogs. And it's there's generations of people who've never had real homemade baked beans when they're really not that hard. I mean, it's just time. You have to put them in a pot and give them 3 hours, but the same as doing good Mexican beans. And I'm sure there's plenty of people who just open cans of beans for their refried beans.
Yeah. I mean, that I think I'm uncertain for worldwide, but if I had to make an assessment, I think worldwide, people as a whole are sort of walking backwards, and this perceived notion of convenience of being able to purchase something on the quick and just open a can or open a bag and just microwave it, or heat it up quickly in a pot, it's making people afraid of food. People don't necessarily know how to cook, and generations are being born into families that don't cook or can't cook or won't cook. And it just kind of breeds the cycle of the inability to touch food and interact with it. I mean, I have friends. I'm going to be 40 next month. So I have friends in my age range that still to this day, what they have for dinner is a can of SpaghettiOs.
Yeah. Have you seen the packaged cut meat so you don't have to touch raw meat? This thing now where it's you can buy chicken cube, and it's marketed towards you don't have to get your hands all gross with raw meat. You just peel back the pull easy lid and dump it right into a pot, because Nobody wants to touch raw chicken.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like just wash your hands and wash your cutting board. But
Yeah.
they're really kind of marketing towards that, even for people who are going to be cooking. Make it easy, but also make it less gross or interactive or whatever that word is you'd use to like why you don't want to touch raw meat.
Yeah.
I
mean, I think it's just like, kind of like everything else. It's, if you think about like war and everything else happening in the world, it's just a lot easier to turn the TV off, right? So
yeah.
you want to eat the chicken, but you don't want to know that it was a chicken, that it came from a farm, that it was killed. And
that's one of my big things. I cook a lot of organ meats, and there's two camps on that, but I'll post pictures on social media and people push back, and I say, like, you want to have a conversation? Like, let's not be hypocrites about this. I caught a lot of flack because last year the Frederick News Post ran an article about me, and they didn't have time to shoot a headshot, and they said, well, send in a photo. And I sent in a photo of me with this roasted pig's head I had done, and it's me leaning on a table with this pig's head, and they ran it in the paper. And they ran that article online, and the comment section went insane about how vulgar it was, how provocative it was, how disgusting it was. And I spent 3 days in the comment section. People were like, the rule, don't read the comments, don't engage the trolls. I'm like, no, I'm going to use this as an opportunity to have a very respectful conversation with people about meat eating and all that. And people come on and say, well, I'm vegan. I say, cool, I love vegan food. Like, I was vegetarian for 5 years. Like, I respect that. But if you eat meat, like, why are you okay with eating pork chop, but not a roasted pig's head? Like, let's have that conversation. Right. I spent 4 days just answering comments on it. I don't know that I swayed anyone, but it felt good personally to have that conversation.
Life decisions.
Life decisions. A friend came over this past weekend and brought 40 pounds of organ meat for me, so I was kind of excited because they got a cow custom butchered, and they didn't want any of that. So I got like tongue and liver and all that stuff, and I'm super excited. It's tasty stuff when you cook it right. I'm looking forward to cooking up that tongue.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, lengua is a totally normal thing in Mexican restaurants. People might not always know what it is if there's no translation there. But we went to Clavel recently in Baltimore, and I took my kids there. And my kids said they wanted beef tacos. And on the menu, there's like no ground beef. And they didn't even have beef. The only option was lengua. So I just said, 2 lengua tacos, and they came and the kids ate them and they were fine with it. And after the fact, I told them, and they were still fine with it. I think my kids handle that better than most grown adults around here.
Yeah. But I think it's, it's the perception, and, it's kind of like some of the grasshoppers, right? They're just a protein. They're very much part of diet, but like a people with like entire people's diets that it's still current. And not just in Mexico, across the world. But it's the association that we have because of the place that we live, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting to see how people are willing to, eat and participate in certain things, but don't want to face and or accept, what the realities are of it and how it's becoming or how it's getting to their table.
And I guess there's the fine line of educating your customer but not being preachy, because I kind of walk that line a little bit. Like, nobody really wants to be talked to or at, but I think you need to kind of have those conversations. So figuring out a way to do that, very quickly. Just last week I had a customer who wanted like a dinner, and they put that they didn't want ethnic food. Like, what does that mean? Like, is there any food that's not ethnic food? Because they didn't want their food from their heritage, and what they meant is like very Eurocentric food. And we talked about this on the last podcast with our guests. Just that idea of like, is that code for like no brown person food? And what they ended up wanting was like filet mignon and like a nice salad with some cool stuff and like European food. Right. But they didn't say we want classical European food. They didn't say we want French food. They said nothing distinctly ethnic, which like breaks that's what I say I like to cook, is like I want to cook foods from Mexico and Thailand and the Middle East, and I'm kind of bored by having to cook like another filet mignon, but it pays the bills.
Yeah, I don't know. I think also it's just, it's education and just knowing what to eat. Like I said, I grew up eating a very, very basic form of food, and it was only because of like my own personal drive to want to learn more about it that I've gotten to learn more about it. But even to this day, I find cuisines and foods that I've never seen before. So unless you're willing and open to trying those things, you're probably not going to find them. I think it's sort of like on us as chefs and restaurateurs and, people in the food scene and whatever community that we're in to educate the public and, let them know and have conversations, maybe not 4 days worth of comment section conversations, but
I only do it in my off time.
but definitely having conversations with the public of, sure, filet mignon is really good, but lengua is really good. Also, beef cheek's really good. Also, offal's really good. So it's just a matter of presenting the food in a way that's more palatable. And, I think people just have these perceptions of things just being gross because they've never had it. You said your kids had lengua. They probably didn't think twice about it. They're like, this is great. And they ate it and the flavors were there. We have conversations about how kids don't eat vegetables when they're kids. And that's sort of the stigma. But it turns out that kids don't like vegetables when they're kids because mom overcooks the crap out of the carrots
Right.
Or there's no salt in it, or it's not fresh and it's out of a can. And, adults don't even.
We let our kids run wild with the condiments. Like right now, they're on a period with the Valentina hot sauce,
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like we just put a bottle on. If my daughter doesn't want to eat whatever, like she'll ask if she can get hot sauce. It's like you can always get hot sauce. Like I don't even care if it's pizza. If you're gonna eat it with hot sauce, cool. And we have like a whole variety of hot sauces in the fridge, and they love that Tajin seasoning. They call it Taki seasoning because it tastes like the chips.
Yeah.
But we have that on the Lazy Susan on our table, and the kids are allowed to get up and season their food. So we go a little milder on some things and then just whatever condiments. If they want to get a whole grain mustard, a hot sauce, some spice. Last night my son wanted to sprinkle cumin on his dinner. Cool, and just let them kind of experiment with flavors and see what they like.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, kids should have access to those things. And I don't know if it's, again, just society or, laziness or, general life fatigue and exhaustion. And the ability to just buy a can of something and put it on the table that makes people go that route. But, like everything else, the easy way is not necessarily always the best way.
Yeah. And I'm sure the kind of sidebar on education, I'm sure another thing you're going to be tackling is cost. I mean, I'm sure you're no stranger to the whole thing that Mexican food's supposed to be cheap, right? And
Right.
tacos are $3, so why is your taco $12 or whatever? And it's kind of the plight of the high-end Mexican restaurant, huh?
Yeah. Well, I mean, your tacos can be $3, but that also means that the kind of meat that we're using is going to justify that price. The kind of tortillas that we're using is going to justify that
But
price.
I love Taco Bamba, and I'm amazed at the prices that they're able to charge for their tacos too. You go in there and you think like, wow, I would have paid a lot more for their tacos as well.
Yeah. Well, I think what Taco Bamba has going for them is that all of their braces are super flavor packed.
Yes.
And going back to the tortilla, maybe they're not making the tortillas, but you almost don't even really think about the tortillas because every time you take a bite, you're getting like punched with flavor. It's not just like bland food. It's not just sort of like, here's a tortilla, here's some food. There's so many places that I've eaten at in the district and outside of this area where people make a Mexican restaurant or a Mexican eatery. And it's sort of like, we'll buy the stuff, we'll put lettuce on it and some like pico de gallo and boom, you have Mexican food. But then there's no seasoning, no flavor, like just no correlation to like the roots or the history or like what the dish actually is. They'll put stuff on the menu and have no idea what they're cooking or why it's called that, or if even what they're calling one thing is really what they're putting out there. But yeah, I think Bamba has had a really good luck with making sure that their formula stays true and stays consistent, and they've seen a lot of growth, and they're being super, super successful doing it.
And then you have interesting things like, not that they're not making money, but is it somewhat of a loss leader for their high up, then they have a more formal dining experience next door. And is that the kind of gateway where you get someone in for a $3 taco that's delicious? And then you think, oh, well, they also have like a taco omakase at, their other restaurant. And I don't know, maybe it builds like kind of customer loyalty or brand awareness in some respect too, because you do see that with some places, kind of having like the higher end restaurants and then the less expensive ones as kind of gateways. I don't know.
Well, I think it's just like the nature of the beast, right? Restaurants are notoriously very risky situations, and they're very expensive to run, from labor to food to keeping the lights on. I mean, you name it. You're spending money. I think it's the only industry that works backwards from all the other industries, where you're allowed to start up in your garage with like cardboard boxes and a Sharpie. And when you open a restaurant, you're expected to full front like $1.5 million and wow everyone with everything you've got.
Yeah.
So I think, and a lot of restaurant groups, like I think it's a smart thing to do. And if you have the means and the capability to do it, to have like one of the places bring home the bacon and one of the places be your place where you get to do what you want to do and put, the story that you're trying to put on the plate, which not necessarily is always a money-making, like sound business decision.
So I guess that brings me to opening a restaurant. You're trying to actively open a restaurant. And I want to just find out kind of how that's going and some of your challenges and where you're at with that and what you need.
What I need, that's a long list. Well, we are in the process of trying to find a new space. We spent the better part of the last 12 months pursuing a space that I think we hit a point where it was both starting to become a little expensive for us to continue pursuing, and we had to sort of just make the decision of like, after a certain amount of time, is like, do we keep pushing with this, or do we, is it time to take a step back and regroup and see what our next step is? That's sort of where we're at. we're regrouping right now. We spent a good amount of time pursuing this, and with it comes not just pursuing the project, but everything involved with it, which is putting the product out there, courting investors, networking within the industry, and figuring out how to do all of those things full time without having a full-time job commitment, and still somehow being able to eat and pay the rent and get gas in the car and get to and from every event. It's taxing, financially, emotionally, spiritually.
Is it hard finding investors?
Yes, it's very hard finding investors. I think it's just from speaking to everyone. We've been really lucky in our process of pursuing this, that we have a really good network of very successful people in the industry that we've been able to reach out to and have sort of held on our side whenever we've had questions or doubts. And everyone's been super open with us. But any of them will tell you that getting the money is the hardest part, unless you've got the bank account to support it, or you take the less traditional route, or maybe more traditional route, I'm not sure, of going to the bank and taking a loan out for yourself. Having to ask strangers for large amounts of money in a market that is as saturated as DC is very difficult, particularly for a first venture.
Does any part of it being a Mexican restaurant, you think, weigh into that, or being someone from Mexico? Are they more likely to fund a French restaurant or an Italian restaurant, or it's just like the nature of the beast and anyone?
Yeah, I think it's depending on your network and your product. Obviously, people that are investing money want to have the safest route to go. I think for a lot of people also, I don't know, from someone that's not in the industry that's trying to put money in, something that sounds more financially viable to them might be opening something like that's super bar heavy and it's just cranking out food that's low cost, and the experience and everything that we try to put in as restaurateurs and chefs to create this experience isn't necessarily something that they factor or really care much about.
Yeah, I can't imagine investing money in a restaurant if I wasn't in the business. I do it because I love it, but I mean, they are notoriously harder to make a profit on, and I'm sure there are other business models that you can make money on that are not a restaurant. So if I just had money to put somewhere, I don't know that I would invest in a restaurant that wasn't mine. So yeah. I'm sure that's an uphill battle.
Yeah, that's an uphill battle. We talked to a million people of all different backgrounds. And one of the biggest things, the conversations that we had or kept coming up was, and often one of the very first things was, what about your friends and family around? how much have you raised through that? And for me as a first generation immigrant, and this happens to a lot of people, is that we're the ones sending money back home. I make my paychecks and portion of that goes back home. So me asking my close friends and family is like something so unrealistic for me to like be able to gather. I mean, $5,000, let alone $30,000, $40,000 to $100,000. That's just something that, at least in my life, will not happen. Maybe other people have different access to different things. So when people ask us like, where's your friends and family stuff? Like, what does that look like? And we're like, well, we are the friends and family.
Is there an industry standard for like what that should make up? Is there kind of a formula that like 30% of your money should be friends and family? Like, I don't know anything about that kind of stuff.
I mean, I don't know that there is a formula. Obviously, I think investors would want to see a big chunk of that come in. Obviously, the more skin you got in the game, the more safe everyone's going to feel. The less money they have to give you, the more safe they're going to feel. But I don't know. I mean, we talked to so many people, and quite literally every single investor that we spoke with had a different suggestion or advice of how to do it. So we didn't really see any like standards where, we talked to person A and person B and they were like, oh, right, they said the same thing. It was always like, oh, you should do it like, you start with step 1 and then you go to step 2. And
it's
then
got to be
you
frustrating to not have a consensus. I think it would be.
Yeah, I mean, for us, that was one of the most difficult parts, trying to like go back and regroup. And then, like we have to pitch to a new person. It's just like, I mean, do we go with like what we know? Do we go with what the last person told us? Do we go with what like the person that actually is writing a check already to us said? Like which one is the winning thing here? But I think for us, the thing that we found to be more successful was just to do what we do. I'm not sure if it's an investor thing or what, but I think at a certain point, particularly people that are successful in business, or maybe it's just human nature, right? Like we all want to believe that we are always making the rightest decision out of all of the decisions to be made. So when we talk to people and we either ask questions, like I think when we first started, we did open the doors for suggestions, and we would ask for advice. We would ask questions when we were talking to investors. But we definitely got to a point where we're like, dude, we're not looking for like your advice. Like, this is what we're doing. We're opening a restaurant. We need this much money. Are you in or are you out? But at a certain point, like, especially when you're sort of like still kind of navigating like what it looks like, and you're not necessarily like feeling super confident about what the conversations are going to go because you've never done it. You open yourself up to like stuff, and you start thinking about it, you internalize it, and you process it, and you try to make the best decision out of that. But then you get to a point where you're doing it so much and you're having to talk to so many people, and your time starts getting so limited and you're exhausted. Like you're just like, hey, like thank you for what you're saying, but this is what we're doing.
I'm sure one of the things that can make you successful is being unique or new or different, but that's the more riskier thing. So I'm sure people who are looking to invest already want to look at existing business models that are working and generating revenue, but that maybe, the playing the safe route isn't necessarily going to be the thing that makes you successful.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that's challenging if you're trying to do something newer or different. And
I don't know if it's a strong suit or a weak point in society. You see it across the board with everything. It's like the chicken or the egg, right? I mean, even when you look at people trying to find jobs, and they're like, well, we want someone with a year's experience. And it's like, well, no one will get me a job, so I can't get the experience. So how does this work?
The same with cooks. It's like looking at experience versus none. I'm at the point where I actually would rather hire someone with no experience and train them the way I want. But from a corporate standpoint, if you work for a company, they say they want a degree, so I can't tell you how many like chefs I've hired from culinary schools that come in and they're terrible. And I actually had a lot better luck with an 18-year-old who had never worked in a restaurant.
Right.
But the company stance is we want you to hire someone with a culinary degree,
right.
And it's just, it's kind of hard,
I think the schools have a big part to play in that because, and I don't know if this is on every industry, but definitely from seeing culinary schools and talking to people coming from different schools, they don't teach you what life after school is going to look like once you leave with your diploma and your 2 years or associates or bachelors, whatever you did from the CIA or Johnson & Wales or you name it, the plethora of schools that are out there. And, we see it, and we get kids that are like, oh, I just graduated, so I'm here for the executive sous chef position that don't necessarily know how to saute something.
Yeah.
And I think that's just something that I don't know if it's instilled on purpose or sort of just insinuated, where they sort of build this false sense of confidence in people. I think to a certain degree, when I started out, I maybe felt a little bit like that, just because of what school had put on. But then you get out on the field and you're in the middle of the battle, and you don't know how to use your rifle.
So
and you're oh wait.
I went to Johnson Wales. I have a 4-year bachelor's. I graduated in '98, and I think at the time they're saying you can start at up to $100,000 a year. I have never made $100,000 a year. I got out of culinary school in 1998, and I'm still waiting for that $100,000 a year they were talking about. But they talk about a 98% placement rate, and some of our graduates are making $100,000 their first year out. I want to know who those people are. But that's the kind of thing. They're selling you this dream that I don't think is really attainable. It's I want the thing, results are not typical warning at the bottom of that statement to say, when they're the diet thing, this woman lost 400 pounds. It's results not typical. It's more 25 pounds.
Yeah. Yeah. They're selling you the Food Network, right? They're selling you that dream. They're telling you that you're going to be able to cook and be this person. But I mean, the reality is can you do it? Sure. I think anyone's capable of doing that if that's the avenue you want to pursue. But you're gonna have to eat some shit in the process. And if you're not willing to put in the time and put in the work and be able to take some hits and get back up every time you get them, you're definitely not gonna be able to stay in the industry for a long time, let alone get on that level.
And that's what builds all the experience brought you to this place where you are now, I believe. It's if I started even higher, I don't think I'd be as successful as I am now, on my own and in my own right. So what's next for building to get to where you want to be? Are you going to continue to do pop-ups? I know you've had a couple things here and there. I saw, was it last week you did a breakfast taco pop-up?
Yeah, we did. We teamed up with the guys at Sun Cinema and our friends at Second Breakfast that do vintage fashion pop-ups. And we had, I think it was over beers that we had been talking about doing something breakfasty. And together, and the opportunity just arose, and we just sort of slept at the table together and made scrambled eggs and sold some clothes and drank some Bloody Marys. It was super fun.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Do you see more formal type dinner pop-ups, small scale, you were doing at District Space, or one night only? Anything on the horizon? Or take it as it comes?
Yeah, right now, definitely taking it as it comes. I'm not sure if I mentioned it or not, but we're all, the team's very much still consulting and doing work everywhere. So our schedules and ideas and events are very contingent on where we're at currently. But yeah, we're definitely doing private events. The one we're excited about is happening in March, which is for Woodmore Super Club, which is Kylie from Mission Michelin, who
I just saw that a couple of days ago.
Yeah. And she came to one of the pop-ups, and we met at one of the pop-ups, and then she's actively come to pretty much everything that we've done. And she just had this idea to bring us along to cook at the house, and we did. And after we did that, that sort of just snowballed into her just doing that, I think, as a monthly thing. So we were the first ones there, and to commemorate their year anniversary of doing that, we're going to be doing the year anniversary at our house.
That's exciting.
Yeah, and
how many people can come to that?
I don't know. I think the first one, when we did it, it was very sort of glued together.
Yeah.
And I think we had about 12 people.
Yeah. That's what I've done with my pop-ups. I still like that idea of a curated dinner party where it's just 15 people, where it's controlled and you can have a really good time.
Yeah. And then from there, she's had everyone there. Right? I think Eric Irabién was just there. Aaron Silverman was just there. I don't know, a ton of people. I think Johnny Spiro was there. They're just all these chefs from around the city all of a sudden are cooking at
I don't remember.
Kylie's house.
Yeah, the other day I think it was like you and 3 others. She announced what the next couple ones were. I thought, wow, like that's pretty cool to pull that off.
Yeah, and it's really great. She's basically selling the tickets to the people that come, and all the money's going to the teams who are coming and putting on the show, which is a great event. It not only brings business to the restaurants and the chefs, but it supports what she believes in. She's very much in the restaurant scene. She does a really good job at being present and supporting everyone.
Awesome. Do you have anything else you really kind of want to talk about before we finish up this like middle end and head on to the speed round?
No, this was great. I think we got it all out.
Cool. Well, we'd like to finish with a quick, we call it the on the fly. So if you're ready, it doesn't have to be super quick, but here's some questions. So what's your favorite tool in the kitchen?
Favorite tool in the kitchen? Sharp knife.
Okay. What's your favorite food to eat?
Favorite food to eat? Rice and beans and tortillas.
Okay. If you had all the money, what is the first position you would hire? Like right now, if you could hire anyone, what position would that be?
If I could hire anyone, the position I would hire would be my sous chef, because I already know who it is.
You need to get some money.
Yeah.
Do you have a favorite chef?
I mean, that's sort of like a contextual thing, like locally. Globally.
Yeah, either. Like someone who you're interested in what they're doing, or someone you've worked for.
I think someone that I admire a lot on the big end. I mean, obviously Jose, who's my chef, but also is hyper inspiring and more aspects than just the kitchen, with all the humanitarian and activist stuff that he does. Gabriela Camara, who does Contramar and Cala in San Francisco, who's done an incredible job of sort of like gone from being like a home cook to like running this super, super successful restaurant group. And yeah, I mean, I have like my local heroes that I look up to, and I'm very excited to know and work next to and provide a lot of inspiration and support, like Andrew Markert from Bugert Saloon, Tom Canana from Bad Saint. That's like my core group of people. James Rexford at Bucks, just right next door to where we're at right now. Yeah, I mean, there's a long list. We could list them, but DC has an incredible network of people that really look out for each other, and we're lucky to be here.
I agree. Art or science?
Art.
Is there anything you do differently from everyone else?
Everything. Yeah, I mean, it's funny going into kitchens and doing things the way that I do them, and there's always sort of like either the young cooks are looking at me doing things different than how chef is doing them and going like, what? Or chef walking by going like, the hell are you doing? That's not how we do it. So yeah, I think everyone sort of develops their own style and technique and the way they do things, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. And yeah, I mean, there's a million things that I do differently, I suppose.
Do you have a favorite culinary resource, whether it be cookbook, website, magazine? Like, anything you really turn to for inspiration?
Well, I used to really like the Lucky Peach magazines before they shut down.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for me, most of my inspiration comes from cookbooks. My cookbook collection grows, which it shouldn't. It's a bad problem.
Same here.
But yeah, I mean, for me, it's I look at the chefs that I really enjoy and that I find interesting and exciting in what they're doing, and I look at their restaurants, and first I start with looking at their menus and see what they're doing, and then I look to see if they have a cookbook and reach out for it, and then read it, not just buy it, but like read it, really read it like you were reading a novel from cover to cover.
That's interesting. So many of them are like that now. It used to be just this kind of here's a recipe, and then it was like here's a recipe and some pictures, and now it's reading the books. I have a lot of those that I like. I love the Relay cookbook, and it's like I don't think I've ever even made anything out of it, but just like reading a thing on like water and being thoughtful about, what's your water taste like? Is there a water filter? Everything you make is made with water,
right.
And just kind of reading that kind of stuff in a book and then not even making anything from it. So I have a lot of those. I think the Manresa book is kind of like that. I've read it a lot, but haven't made anything from it.
Yeah, I mean, it's continuing education, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's some of the best learning that I've done aside from being on the job has come from reading.
Especially now working alone, essentially. That's the boat I'm in, where I'm not going in a kitchen every day and having that synergy and working with people and seeing what they're doing and trying their stuff. So it's like, how do you kind of find that inspiration when you're working by yourself?
Yeah. Well, for me, I know what helps a lot is, reaching out to my restaurant network, whether it is because I'm coming in to fill in when they need help, or just reaching out and saying, hey, I want to come spend a day with you. But staging is still a very much real thing, and something that I think people appreciate if you're able to come in and help out. Every time you leave after spending, 8 hours with a kitchen team, you leave with something new every time.
And I guess last, what do you want to be remembered for? We put this on the fly. And I don't know if it's on the fly, but we always kind of like end on that note. Is there anything you personally as a chef want to be remembered for?
I think broadening the expectation and the knowledge base for the public of what Mexican food is, and also for being able to help out the Latin American immigrant communities in our area that make up the large majority of kitchens in mindful and meaningful ways, beyond just giving them jobs, but really helping build them up into places where their livelihoods and their economies are sustainable for them.
That's a good answer. So where can people find you on the internet? How can people connect with you, follow your progress on the restaurant and everything?
Our website is sort of a work in progress, but most of the news come out as we get them on our Instagram for Amparo. It's at Amparo Fondita, AMPAROFONDITA, or my personal Instagram account, which is Pinche Cocinero. It's at PINCHECOCINERO.
And I always put links in the show notes, so people will be able to find that and click on a hyperlink.
Awesome.
All right, well, thanks so much, and I look forward to following the progress. And as always, this is Chris with Chefs Without Restaurants, and we will see you next week. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Chefs Without Restaurants podcast. And if you're interested in being a guest on the show or sponsoring a show, please let us know. We can be reached at chefswithoutrestaurants@gmail.com. Thanks so much.